Okay, so welcome back. When last we spoke, I believe I left you with some homework. You were supposed to kind of ponder when, how government was supposed to have come about in the first place. And hopefully you came up with some answers. Since records didn't really exist, all we have to go on to answer that question is our own minds, and the truth can be known. When does the need for government emerge? That's a profound question, but its answer is actually quite simple. When does the need for government emerge? No one doubts that we need government today. Maybe they should, but that's a discussion for another time. When does that need occur? I say it's when the first person realizes that he or she is no longer reasonably capable of securing his or her own natural rights by themselves. That person then sets about convincing others that there's an issue, and that issue is their freedom, and that the solution to the issue of losing the security of their freedom is to band together to come up with a system of rules. That's probably going to be a one-on-one conversation between the first brilliant person that thinks of a governing system and the first person they try to convince that they're right. Well, if everything goes accordingly, instead of one person having this idea, now that's two people have that idea. Let's band together, come up with some rules, and live our lives according to those rules. Well, those two people set out, and they find other people. Now keep in mind, when government first comes about, humanity lives in small tribes. There are no cities yet. Human beings are still hunters and gatherers, nomads. So I'm talking about first government, how it comes into being. What I've laid out so far simply stands to reason, and it is impossible for anyone to come to the conclusion that the idea of government enacted came about any other way. It is the only way that makes sense. So follow along with me on down this path a little bit further. So now you have a small group of people going out to convince a larger yet still small group of people that in order for them all to be more secure in their natural rights, that is, to be more secure against the threat of theft of my stuff, to be more secure in my pursuit of life, as in to stay alive longer, I decided to give some power to this governing authority who has the ability to round people up, house them, keep them away from the rest of us, we give the government the authority to take the bad guys and keep them out of society. Well, in order for any of that to come about, the group of people itself that is to be governed has to consent. Consent to what? Without governance, human beings are each themselves sovereign. That is, each human being makes the final rule. What they say goes. And in that sort of world, whoever is the best fighter, whoever has the biggest stick, the best technique, whatever makes the king of the hill at that time, whoever has the most might was right. Because human beings are themselves sovereign. I am in control of my body. It's mine. I'm in control of my mind to some extent. My mind may ultimately be in control of me, but that's another issue. But me, myself, and I exist. And before my wrists go into handcuffs, I have to allow it to happen. Otherwise, you got quite a fight on your hands. In order for me to not have that which I used to have, I'm either out of the question and can't fight, or I will fight. because that I want you to take my stuff, right? And I feel justified. So we're slowly building up to this idea of consent of the governed. That is cornerstone of American freedom. It's defined, at least mentioned, in our Declaration of Independence. And it's a very key point. Human beings enacted government originally to better secure their natural rights. So that if someone does steal from me, and they happen to be stronger than me and better equipped than me, I have recourse to get my stuff back. If someone who's bigger and stronger than me just come up to me and punch me in my face and I'm defenseless against them, what recourse do I have? Well, in a jungle or in a state of existence without government, I have none. I have simply to take it. That's the law of the jungle. That is according to natural law. The human beings enacted governance to help secure their natural rights because they could no longer do it themselves. It is that simple. And if you extrapolate from that premise, what powers does the government have? Well, I mentioned sovereignty. I do have the sovereign power to hit you back if you hit me, even if that means I'm going to take a more severe ass whipping. If you hit me, I have the right to hit you back. I'm justified if I hit you back, but you're not justified in having hit me in the first place. Right? So, we institute government to help us secure ourselves. And when violations of that security occur, we call those injustices. We look to our governing system to right that injustice, to bring justice to that which was unjust. Follow me? We as Americans agree with James Madison, as he said it first, that the end of government is justice. That is securing our rights. So we, as human beings, originally decided, again I'm talking about the formation of the first form of government, we gave a portion of our individual sovereignty, say our right to hit back, to this governing body. We agree in a civil society that we kind of relinquish our right to hit back when we hire people to do that for us. And that is exactly what our police force is. We've come up as a society with certain rules that we all say that we're going to exist under. And when violations of those rules exist, we, people, empower police officers to deprive those perpetrators of their natural rights. Specifically, the right to move, because we shackle them. They don't have the right to travel because we put them where we want them to go, as in jail. We hold them, we contain them, we take away every right. They don't have the right to speak. They don't even have the right to speak because government has the lawful authority to gag people. So, literally. So when we give the government the authority to take away others' natural rights, government can only do that. In fact, it can only act at all as long and be just as long as it's acting within the consent of the governed, because it is the group of people in mass that have come together to give the government its authority in the first place, without the people saying, yes, government, you can do this, and yes, you can do that. If the government was to do it anyway, then that's government exercising power and authority over the people. Once government exists, what's to stop it from exercising its authority over the people? One of the justifications that Thomas Jefferson gave for our independence was the fact that England was an island. He said, why should an island control a continent? It stands to reason that the continent should be free of the island. And to some degree, it kind of makes sense. To use that analogy to our specific discussion, is it natural for government that is supposed to behave with the consent of the governed? Is it natural when that government becomes totalitarian? When that government becomes so powerful that it's doesn't fear its people when that government becomes so powerful that it can at will enact whatever laws that it chooses, regardless of natural rights. If you look at the world as I do, you answer that it is unnatural for government to justly wield such power. And that's because I am of the understanding that in order for government to exist in a just fashion in the first place, it must occur with the consent of the governed. But that is by itself merely an idea. And as I last stated in our last discussion, that once you learn one thing, you really ought to investigate its opposite. So what I've just outlined is how just government comes about. People get together and will it into being and agree to its dictates. ... What about unjust government? Where does that come from? Well, imagine the world again without government. The most powerful one is always right. The existence of government is a threat to the power of that one most powerful individual, isn't it? So what if that powerful individual gets with other individuals because they see the formation of this government on the horizon? They say, hey, these group of people over here banding together make all these rules and I don't like it. How about you and I band together and whatever rules they make, we'll break, and when they try to arrest us, we'll just beat them down. If they can't enforce their rules don't exist. So a just government starts to become formed. And it can't handle the rebellion that first comes its way. A group of people, citizens, that don't want to follow its dictates. What then? Then you basically have one people conquering another people. It's not one person conquering another person because we've all aligned ourselves in these ties. It's one people dominating another people. One people being vanquished by another, forced into submission. So somehow or another, government did come into being, and it can only be one of those two ways. Now we live in a day and age where the government can do anything that it wants to do. It can spend trillions of dollars and amass trillions of debt. It can fly invisible planes. It can drive invisible tanks. And it can sail invisible ships. And it can make war all over the world within a matter of minutes. We have bombs so powerful we can destroy ourselves. This discussion, if you recall, is about freedom. What is freedom? We've discussed now that you have to come to certain concrete ideas to move this discussion forward any. First, you have to have decided whether or not human beings can own things. Then you have to decide whether or not they're justified in trying to secure their rights by collectivizing. I believe they were. And that means that each individual decided to give a portion of its sovereignty up to the government. That's how governments can say that they're sovereign, because they become the rule makers over that society. And if the rules say, hey, we're not allowed to make war with other countries, if you try to make war with other countries, then that government has the power to take you out of society. If the rules of that government are, we will only make war with other societies, if you try to make peace, you can be justly jailed for it. So there becomes an issue of what really is a just government. I would suggest that since government is formed in the first place to secure natural rights, a just government's power only extends to those actions which further its charter. That is, it can only do that which more secures your rights. It cannot, with justification, do that which takes away your rights. Dear Americans, Look around you, please. What rights do you have? I mean, really, what can you go out and do? Don't tell me that you can talk, because I can tell you where you can't talk. Don't tell me that you can own a gun, because I can tell you where you can't own a gun. Don't tell me that you can protest your government, because I can show you right now a government protester that's in jail. Depending on how you choose to protest, can land you in jail for a term of years. But depending on how the government enforces its laws, you can be a domestic terrorist and blow up buildings and kill Americans, like Bill Ayers. And then later in life, gain a job teaching people the same radical shit you believe. Let them get in trouble. You've already paid your price. It's very easy to take freedom for granted. And it's very easy to get an idea of freedom distorted. And it's very easy to say, hey government, since we put you in power, we want you to do this and we want you to do that. But when we let our own human will dictate what we want the government to do, that's a slippery slope, my friend, because these are facts. Government is a necessary evil. And it is very much like fire. A very fine tool. A life-changing tool. Societal-changing. World-changing tool. As long as it's controlled. But the moment that it becomes the master, you will get burned. As every society who's ever allowed its government to become its master has always gotten burned. I can list you a litany of societies where the people were at once supreme, but then over the course of time, things happened, and one day the government was the boss. And governments are not very good at relinquishing power. In fact, you'll notice the world over, all governments, including the American government, exists to usurp for itself ever greater power. Our founders knew that it would, and they put in place systems to prevent that. The one amendment that was the most important, that was not included, and to my knowledge was never even brought up, was determining exactly how the Constitution was going to be interpreted. And there was a reason it wasn't brought up. Not only did people not have a good answer for that question, they didn't want a single way of looking at the document. They wanted there to be breathing room, room for interpretation, room for change. When our country was founded, slavery was legal. Now it's not. Our founders created a document that would allow that and yet keep the government intact through that transition. It worked. But I believe in the course of that specific transition, it also got irreparably broken. That's when the federal government decided, the people decided the federal government had a greater role in their lives for good than what before then they thought the government could be. Government was always seen as a negative role, a powerful thing that should be kept in check. After the Civil War, no more the case. The government can do the great good of abolishing slavery. Imagine what all the other goods are that it can do. I'm sorry, my friend. I don't believe the government's very good at doing anything good. Certainly not ours, as bloated and as big as it is, encumbered by its mass. It really reminds me more of a blob. Think of a nasty, obese blob of whipped cream. Even if it has legs and it can stand up, if it's too big, all that blob is just going to still in the front and the back and all around the side, surrounding the legs, lay on the floor. You won't be able to walk, you trip over your belly. That's kind of what our government does now. A few years ago, it lived on a few $1 trillion. Now it lives on $4 trillion. Too bad it only brings in its own 2.5. So live on all of our income plus $1.5 trillion plus of the rest of the world's income. I don't see that being very sustainable for long. Our framers envisioned a limited government, a system where the rules for everybody were laid out. The framework is there, and it's up to the citizens of that place to pick and choose their own, not only their own laws, but their own lawmakers. What was unique about the American system was that it took this idea of freedom, you do you, and tried to make a governing system around it so that you're just doing you, as long as you doing you doesn't infringe on somebody else's rights. And they tried just to give the government enough power to secure for its citizens their individual security, their individual rights. Because of course our government has become more corrupt over time. It's done a lot less securing rights and a lot more violating rights. I believe it's time to put a change to it. That's one reason I'm doing this series of videos. I want to see if I can stir the American public imagination. I wonder if I can make people see that, hey, in this country, in this late day and age, we're still the boss. And if my government is doing something I don't want it to do, then it's my duty to speak up against it. In our next installment, I will be getting my own copy, one of my many copies of the Declaration of Independence out, and I'll be quoting from it. And I'll move this discussion forward now that we've decided, for lack of a better word, that human beings can own, and that government come into being by our will, and that a just government does what its people want, not so much what is right or just or fair, but simply what the people want, as it should do. That's why it exists. It exists to secure our rights. But, whoa, if what we want is not for our rights to be secured, but we want the government to give us stuff, who are you to say that we have the wrong idea of government? That misunderstanding is the subject of the next Brilliant Truth. Thank you. I wish you all the best till I see you again.